Good morning. This is Claudia Files with the Center for Atlantic Studies. Thank you to everyone for joining us today. We're here for an open house discussion with Panayotis League. Paddy, you are a performer, you are a researcher, and we're so delighted to have you join us today to talk about performance traditions in Greece and about your experience as both a performer and a researcher. So thank you for joining us.
Thank you, Claudia, and thanks to everyone. I'm delighted to be a part of this and looking forward to the discussion.
Great. Unfortunately, I'm a little bit under the weather today, so I'm going to hand off to Sarah, who's going to do the proper introductions. Thanks.
Hi, I'm Sarah Scott, and I'm beaming in from Scotland. And so, just to introduce Panayotis a little bit further, I think you normally go by Paddy, right? Which might be
about half the time.
About half the time. So, Panayotis or Paddy, you go by either. Okay. And you grew up in a Greek and Irish family, and you have accomplished musicians on both sides of the family, right?
That's right.
And you began playing drums and percussion when you were a teenager, and you've become a real driving force behind the revival of traditional Greek and Irish music worldwide. And you play, well, there's a sort of long list of instruments: violin, lyra, laouto, bouzouki, mandolin, guitar, bagpipes, percussion, and you sing in various languages. And you've got a number of recordings and have performed at concerts, over 1,000 concerts. You're also a scholar of traditional Greek music. You're currently a doctoral candidate in ethnomusicology at Harvard, and you're researching consolidation and expression of ethnic identity through music and dance in Greece and in Greek diaspora communities throughout the United States. And you've got research interests in the links between Byzantine liturgical music, folk music of the Aegean, tradition, contemporary means of education in rural Greece, musical archaeology, and the list goes on and on and on. So I hope you'll be able to tell us a little bit about some of those things and explain, the background to some of those things.
Sure. Well, thanks for the introduction. So as you said, yeah, I grew up in a family. My mother is Greek, my father's Irish. I grew up mostly in the U.S., but around a lot of people who are always coming and going to different places in the world and bringing with them and presumably taking with them a lot of musical luggage as well as more tangible things. So I was very lucky actually to grow up around a lot of very good musicians who were active in a really wide variety of different media or different genres. I spent a lot of my childhood in a small town on the Gulf Coast of Florida, a little bit north of Tampa, called Tarpon Springs, where my mother's family immigrated to there. They were involved in the sponge diving industry. So this is a small town that's largely inhabited by people from the Greek island of Kalymnos, very close to the coast, the Aegean coast of Turkey. And there are a lot of Kalymnos has a very rich, very old, and very powerful song and instrumental music and dance tradition. So I grew up around a lot of musicians from there. So at an early age, the particular vibrancy of the intersection between oral poetry and music and dance all working together to bring people together and for people to work all kinds of things out made a very big impression on me. That Kalymnian music from Kalymnos made a huge impression on me. And even though I didn't start actively performing that music until I was probably in my late teens or even early 20s, I had it all in my head, and I think indirectly or directly it led me towards a lot of other things. My Irish grandfather was a great musician. He was classically trained, but also grew up around a lot of traditional Irish music. So I heard him playing the piano and cello a lot when I was a child. I think that had an influence on me. And a lot of musicians in my family, my more immediate family as well. At any rate, yeah, so as you said, I'm an ethnomusicologist, and I study, like I just mentioned, I tend to be interested in the intersection between at least these three things. Like I said, poetry on the one hand, usually oral poetry that's to some degree composed in the moment based on all kinds of patterns and things that the performer has memorized, internalized. Music, both just voices and instrumental music, and movement, usually some kind of dancing. And all of these things in the musics that I study go very closely together. So I mostly work with music from various Greek islands, Kalymnos, like I mentioned, the western part of the island of Crete, and my dissertation actually is focusing on music from the island of Lesvos, or Mytilene, also very close to the coast of Turkey. And I also work in northeastern Brazil with the oral poetry and music and dance traditions there.
So Patty, can I just ask a couple of questions about this? I mean, your story is so beautiful, and I think so few of us probably have had that kind of experience of growing up with music in the house, music in our family. You know, I'm curious to ask you about now your experience as being a researcher and a performer. I mean, on the one hand, you speak so, I think, emotionally about your exposure to this music, and on the other hand, I think your I think typically scholarly work can often feel a little bit dry. I'm just wondering about how do you balance those two out? And do you think there's room in your scholarly work for that kind of emotional response to music, or do you have to separate them?
I think there's absolutely room, and actually that's the whole reason why I decided to become an academic, because I realized really early, again, I'm lucky that I had a lot of exposure to the Greek, well, both the Greek and the Irish traditions, music traditions, both have a very long history of practitioners also being scholars of the music in the way that we think about it. And writing things, doing what we would call field work, interviewing people, writing things down, making collections, analyzing these collections, and writing, thinking very hard about what they do, what they grew up doing, or what they came into doing, discussing it at a very high, very rigorous intellectual level with other people, and reflecting very deeply, thinking very deeply about these things, and writing profound things about them. So I think, so I'm an ethnomusicologist, which in ethnomusicology, if you asked 20 self-described ethnomusicologists what that means, you get probably 20 very different answers, more so than most academic fields. But essentially, in a nutshell, the way I think about ethnomusicology is, and this is based on its history, its particular history, it's really the intersection between traditional, I should say, historical, Europeanist, and Eurocentric music history studies that came out of particularly 19th century Central and Western European academic discourse about music, and anthropology. So a focus, which is an early to mid 20th century, the early to mid 20th century blossoming of anthropology. It should be noted, largely because of European colonialism. So this is something that as ethnomusicologists we're always trying to be very conscious of, and trying to not get away from, but trying to interrogate and be very critical of. But this intersection of a very deep intellectual engagement with music, both as a scholar and as a performer, with the heavy commitment to ethnography, that is, spending a lot of time, real time, with people, learning about what they do, why they do things, trying to participate to the greatest extent that one can, talking to them about it, thinking about it, writing things down, coming up with thoughts, and then sharing those with the people you're working with and having a dialogue. Those two things are foundation stones of ethnomusicology. And if the ethnomusicologist is also a performer and is also someone who's inside, for lack of a better term right now, inside the tradition they're studying, I think the result potentially is even stronger and more widely relevant to a larger number of people. Because if you're inside a tradition, especially if you've grown up around it, if you've internalized all of its rules and its conventions and the ways you do or don't do things, sometimes it's hard to step out of that and think very critically about why you do things. And conversely, if you don't really know all the secret codes that even people might not be aware of, the way they go about their daily business as a musician, sometimes it's hard to even learn some of the most basic things that people take for granted, because a lot of the most basic fundamental things about music, like anything that people do, don't often get discussed because they're obvious to everyone who does them.
Patty,
what sort of things are you referring to there? Can you give us an example?
Well, it could be things like when it's appropriate in the Greek tradition that I mostly work with, it could be things like as simple as the best way or the right way to go about tuning an instrument. Like, what do you rely on to tune like, for example, the laouto right here, which is an instrument that maybe a little bit later I'll play. How do you go about tuning it? I mean, traditionally speaking, people didn't have access to electric tuners, or even, in most of the Greek islands, diapason, like a little tuning fork or something like that. How do you go about deciding what's the right way to tune it, what pitch it's going to be tuned to, this kind of thing? It could be something like when it's appropriate for person A, person B, person C to sing at a gathering. Could be more structural things, like I'm working right now on a project about extemporaneous sung poetry and how poetry works in conjunction with different melodies on the island of Kalymnos. So these very extremely complex rules about, just in order to participate, just in order to sing a song, you have to have internalized this really, no pun intended, Byzantine labyrinth of different metrical and modal rules. But if you're around it all the time, you just internalize it and you don't think about it. But getting, like, me as someone who internalized all those rules, sitting down and trying to explain them, try to set up elaborate little experiments, like, how many different melodies can I fit this one couplet to? Does it work? Why, when it fails, why? This kind of thing is very challenging as someone who just tends to plug things in and do them. So
that's beautiful.
That kind of stuff. There's a lot, there's a lot of that kind of stuff. Yeah.
So Patty, that's so interesting. I just want to take a break here and see if we have any comments or questions from our community members at this point. Anyone have a thought yet? It's okay. It's okay if we don't. So I'm curious because you are already prompting ideas for me. So many members of our community, as you know, have worked through or are working through some of the content in the Heroes X, in the Heroes X project. And I know that you were familiar with that content in that project as well, because you are also, for instance, last year you were a teaching fellow in the Harvard College course that covered the same content. One of the things we have talked about is this idea that, oftentimes for someone to get something like an INOS or a story, or to really get all the information that's being shared in a performance, they need to be philos, right? They need to be friends. They need to be mentally prepared, emotionally prepared, socially prepared, and connected. And so what you are saying here, I think, sort of speaks to me in terms of the kind of connections we've been making with ancient Greek literature, and when we're thinking about performance in ancient traditions. So does that work for you as you think back and forth between ancient traditions and modern traditions? Or how has your experience with music and performance helped you understand ancient traditions better?
Well, in quite a lot of ways. The thing that most immediately comes to mind, as you were saying, you have to be mentally prepared. You have to be philos, have this relationship, this emotional and I suppose we could say spiritual, in the sense of psyche, relationship with the material, or with the genre, or with the hero. I would say that thinking about the ritual context of song culture, of ancient Greek song culture, and the ritual context of the Greek song culture that I'm familiar with, I see all kinds of lights go on in terms of both the way that somebody has to be, using this terminology, ritually prepared, or correctly ritually prepared to participate in the ritual. We know, of course, from the ancient Greek material exactly what that means, but in a lot of the modern Greek traditions I study, there is a very explicit ritual context to music making. For example, traditionally speaking, in rural Greek island society, one of the major venues for music making would be as part of a celebration for the feast of a saint. So the modern Greek Christian version of I'm not hesitant in saying, in many ways, it is a continuation. The saints cults in Eastern Orthodoxy are very much, in many obvious ways, a continuation of the ancient Greek hero culture. So often, a lot of the music I learned by going to these events in my late teens, early 20s, on the island of Kalymnos in particular, also on the island of Crete, where I went to college. And learning, going to long liturgies in these tiny chapels on the top of mountains on this island, and waiting around while the ritual food was prepared, like a particular beef stew from a cow that had just been slaughtered for the occasion, or on certain vegetarian feasts, chickpeas stewed in the oven or something like that. It gets handed out in descending order of to people in descending order of their importance, and then the music starts and lasts for 12 hours until lunchtime the next morning, this kind of thing, and you're able to observe all these like I said before, these particular ritual sequences of events. So having that experience, and having had that experience in my life before I started to really engage with the ancient Greek material when I was studying in college, and then just recently teaching it, was really profound. I was able to, at the very least, maybe feel, on a personal level, I can't assume that anybody else would feel this way, but make some kind of, at least step a little bit towards, in my imagination, and in my emotional imagination, towards what it must be like to be a pilgrim going to Achilles' tomb and going to get the games for some particular hero.
That's so beautiful. And I love that sense of the, thinking about you at these ritual events, and about how the music and the performance is framed by this ritual, right? I mean, they just seem to go, they're not separate. They're not separated, right? They almost have to be together. So that's so amazing. So yeah, Janet, please.
Yeah. Music and community, you have them together. The experience is shared. Music is not just, let me just listen to this and enjoy it. It's part of daily life, interwoven. You have wedding songs, you have during funerals. Music is so part of the society, and people get excited all together.
Yes.
Yeah. It's beautiful.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. And I mean, I don't want to present this romanticized image that this is the only way the music that I play is experienced. In fact, I think in this day and age, especially if you're someone who's really interested in this music, like myself, probably 90% of my interactions with this music are not in those environments, because they tend to be seasonally recurring. I mean, how many, even if you're a full-time professional musician in a populated place, it's not like you're playing every weekend or every couple of weeks even for an event like this. But so most of the time I'm sitting here by myself, or even just with one other person, something very special happens. But I totally agree, and it's, again, like I said before, that intersection of which again in ancient Greek song culture we see so often in almost all of the manifestations of song, especially the later in time we go. Poetry, music, and group movement, dancing, these kind of things. I mean, those things coming together make something so beautiful and so special, and really, I mean, for a lot of people, life-changing. I mean, I could have easily not gotten interested in this stuff at all and just gone on being, who I am, an American person who happens to have this background, but not having gotten into this. But I had some very profound experiences with this music in, exactly as you said, Janet, this group setting, everybody together, all singing together, all dancing together. And it's, if you've experienced anything like that, whether it's in traditional Greek or Turkish music, or at a rock concert, or sitting around the camp, at summer camp, sitting around a fire singing songs, or just with your friends singing along to the radio. I mean, people joining voices together and moving together, especially when they're touching each other, is a very profound and potentially life-changing experience. Yeah.
That's amazing. So I think Maria has a question. Oh, Maria, you're muted.
Yes, I would like to thank Paddy very much for his presentation. What I would like to know, or Paddy to share with us, since I'm coming almost from the same background, the same religious background, and as Paddy rightly said that when, for example, you're a Christian Orthodox, you have to attend these liturgies, and the culmination of these liturgies is especially during Easter, where you have to attend all these long masses. And I was wondering, is it possible to elucidate for us this, what I would say, for example, this common Mediterranean background? For example, I assume that when you go to a synagogue, you will hear the cantor, you know, just singing the psalms. Is it possible just to illustrate this common background between the Byzantine music, when for example, what we call the psaltes, this is how it is called, and how the two psaltes in a church, they are divided like almost in ancient tragedy between, they form like a chorus.
Absolutely.
And the priest is almost like he's almost in the center of the scene. So this is what I would like Paddy to illustrate this for us.
Sure, that's a really great point. So, if you're unfamiliar, when Maria says psaltes, it's the chanters, the cantors in the Greek Orthodox liturgical tradition. So the liturgical music of, like the traditional music of pretty much the entire Mediterranean basin, and I mean, even though this is a little inexact, it's actually very convenient and almost quite exact. Pretty much all of the former Ottoman lands, most of which were the former Byzantine lands controlled by the Byzantine Empire, of course. Pretty much all of the societies in this region, which include the Greeks, Turks, all of the Arab world, Persian, much of at least Mediterranean Jewish culture, Armenian, to a great degree, much of North Africa, going in many ways as far west as places in, of course, Albania, places in Italy even, and even in some degrees the south of France and the south of Spain because of the Moorish heritage there, and then extending into the Balkans and east into many parts of the former Soviet Union, the Baltic states, the Caucasus, etc. This whole region has a really profoundly common ancestry, musically speaking, as well as culturally speaking in many ways, because most of the musical traditions, both liturgical, both sacred and secular, are based on this modal, non-harmonic, so in other words, not really chords, just single melody lines that are accompanied either by a drone or by or by rhythmic events. And this common heritage we can very, very clearly trace very far back in history, very clearly to ancient Greek music, discourse about music, and unfortunately we know very little about the technical details of musical practice in the ancient world. But surely the confluence of ancient Greek, Persian, and other regional musics produced what became the popular and secular and sacred music, in the Byzantine Empire and the Eastern Christian Empire, which then contributed very heavily to the music in the Ottoman Empire. And so all of these traditions are heirs to that common tradition. And it's really remarkable sometimes where you it's crazy some of the commonalities that you hear between things sometimes. So yeah.
You said that we don't. Sorry, you said that we don't know much about what the really ancient Greek music would have been like, and we actually have a question that was posted on our forum, which was, there's this mythology about music and the song, for example, of Orpheus, who played in front of Hades and Persephone. So symbolically, that is part of that culture. But how much do you think there's any evidence, and how might we look for evidence about things like that being retained in any ongoing musical traditions? Some of those ancient songs.
Right. Yeah, that's hard, and there are people who could answer that question much more thoroughly than me who would have on the tip of their tongue specific pieces of evidence. But what I can say from my own research, in both my philological research but also my ethnographic research in modern Greece, is that even if the specific musical content or poetic content in most cases we don't really know anything concrete about the specific musical content. Where we have poetic content, there are some metrical similarities and certainly thematic similarities. And I think it's no surprise that in the span of just a couple of thousand years, people speaking the same language, living under similar conditions, and I don't think there's any surprise that the same kinds of symbols, the same kinds of images would continue to resonate for them. And we can see this very clearly in other places in the world that haven't really changed. Like, for the best example, I think, is in the Indian subcontinent, and particularly various cultures that continue to speak the same language and continue to follow the same religious system. Yeah, Claudia?
Oh, no, I'm just getting so excited, Paddy. I didn't mean to interrupt you, but what I'm hoping to do next is I'm so interested in this thematic connection you're making.
Yeah.
I'm hoping maybe you'll give us some examples and not just talk about it, but maybe is there something that you could maybe perform a little bit for us?
Sure.
To make a connection to some of the themes that our community has been thinking about.
Definitely, yeah. So there's a lot of the place that I think is the genre, I should say, that's easiest to hear and see these particular connections is ritual context, but particularly the wedding ritual or the wedding ritual. So songs from the Greek islands that have to do that are sung right before weddings that are in praise of either the bride or the groom to be. A lot of and we've talked about this before, Claudia, with Professor Gregory Naj. A lot of the imagery is strikingly similar to the imagery that we hear in some of the songs of Sappho, some of her wedding songs, and other things from the ancient world. Particularly in imagery that is apotheosis, this deification, this momentary deification of the bride or groom, where in very explicit terms they're described as in almost supernatural terms. Let me grab the laouto here, and
thank you.
If I can, here, let me move my camera so you can see the instrument a little better.
Thanks, Paddy. That's beautiful. And as you get set up, I just want to remind everybody that we do have a Q&A feature available on the Google Plus event page for this project. So if they have questions, we encourage them to post those questions there. They can find the link on the Hour 25 website.
Is that audible, Razun? Okay. Okay, so I'll sing a little bit of a song from the island of Kalymnos. This is a song that's typically sung at weddings or before weddings in praise of the bride in particular. And we actually call it Parianoskopos, so the melody from the island of Paros. Okay, Kalymnian music is very loud, and the singing style is very loud, and so I don't want to deafen everybody. So I was going to sing it a little bit lower, but maybe I'll just sing it the way it's sung.
Go for it. Okay, go for it.
So so this is a mandinada, which is a rhyming couplet in iambic decapentameter, so 2 lines of 15 syllables, which is the dominant poetry form in most of the Greek Aegean. So this is a song that's sung about the bride, and so it says, "Ferte sapouni kritiko, nero tu Iordani, na lusi ta malakya tis, na vali to stefani." So it says, bring soap from Crete, so the highest quality olive oil soap you could get, and water from the Jordan River, the holiest water you could find, where Christ was baptized, so that she can wash her hair, so that she can put on the wedding wreath. So in the Orthodox tradition, when the couple is going to get married, they put on these twin wreaths that are linked together, and they're wreaths that are either made really of laurel, of Daphne, right? Or most often these days, some kind of other material, but in the shape of laurel leaf. So this is obviously a very obvious connection to the heroic wreath that that victors at games in ancient Greece, in the ancient Greek world would wear. So here's the Parianos. Teresa puni critico nero tui ordani. Na lusita malachiati navalito Stefani. Παναγιάμουδος τους χρόνια, σαν της λεμόνιας τα κλόνια.
Beautiful, Patty. Thank you so much. We're all muted, so everyone is clapping now. So that is just so gorgeous. So I'd like to invite everyone to maybe take themselves off mute. If they have a question or comment, I'd love to hear any reactions to that. Any questions, Bill?
So I was thinking about that moment in the Iliad where Achilles is supposed to be singing a song about the glories of men, and I wonder if in your studies you make any differentiation between secular and sacred music. The stories we tell about other people versus the hymns we sing to the Almighty. Is there a difference there?
There is, and there's a lot of gray area. So theoretically, and I should say canonically, there's a pretty hard line in the Greek world between the ritual music of the Orthodox Church and folk music or secular music, in that there's all kinds of stipulations that traditionally, for example, musical instruments aren't supposed to be allowed in the church, especially during services. This is definitely not held to a lot of the time. Greek Orthodox parishes, particularly in America, you'll frequently hear organs and this kind of thing. But more importantly, there's a lot of gray area, not only in terms of the people who practice both types of music, because especially in the traditional context, if you're a talented musician, your friends would certainly want you to sing with them in the tavern, but also probably everybody in the village would want you to be the guy who's leading the hymns in church, because they want to listen to somebody with a good voice, right? But there also are a lot of songs that researchers tend to call paraliturgical songs, so that are on sacred themes, but are sung in non-sacred contexts. They might be sung particularly on a saint's day. There's a famous one that's very popular all over the Dodecanese Islands, sung on St. George's Day, which is really a narration of the life of St. George, rescuing the princess from the dragon, slaying the dragon, and the king offering his crown, but St. George saying, no, just build a church for me and I'll go on my merry way. So songs like that are very common. Does that get more or less to your question? Yeah, definitely. I think Maria is raising her hand.
May I also add that, as Paddy beautifully said, that St. George is also venerated by both Greeks and Turks in many areas, and there are also, as Paddy also beautifully explained, there are certain people, very prominent figures of liturgical music. For example, Simon Karas, who sang both traditional songs and also traditional music. Another case, for example, is Chronis Aidonidis, who also sings liturgical music. He's a very old man. Everybody in Greece loves him, and he comes from Thrace, where I come from, where my ancestors come from, and he sings both liturgical and folk music.
Yes, and Chronis Aidonidis, yeah, from the land of Orpheus. He's he's one of my
exactly
favorite
from
singers. Yeah, my favorite example of this kind of thing was a very important chanter, Greek Orthodox chanter from Istanbul. Well, he was one of the chanters at the Ecumenical Patriarchate in Istanbul, but we call him Petros o Peloponnesios, Petros the Peloponnesian, because of his place of origin. But he was one of the most important composers of Greek liturgical music, one of the important reformers of the pedagogical system of the music, one of the head chanters in the Orthodox Patriarchate, but also he was a very, very well-known, respected performer and composer of Ottoman classical music. He was one of the favorites in the Sultan's court, and composed and performed a lot of music, not just for secular-ish Ottoman music, but also for the Mevlevi, known as the dervish, the Mevlevi order, at their ceremonies. And he was, by some accounts, was actually a member of the Mevlevi order. So this kind of thing is not uncommon at all in the history of music in this part of the world.
Janet, please.
I'll change the subject a little bit. You mentioned that music and touching, the folklore, men and women are dancing. From my experience, from my in-laws, what I heard, men and women in the village, they, especially young men and women to be married, they don't come together often. These are the only times that young men and young women can come together and dance. And those touching moments are life-changing, because that's how they find their future brides and future husbands. And do you have songs that young men, they come together and fall in love? Probably have a lot of songs like that.
You mean where songs where that's being narrated?
Yes. About how they meet in this kind of maybe not.
Well, it's interesting that everything you say is 100% true, and I've heard countless stories from people, both people in my community and from other communities, about these kind of things happening. And as you say, especially in the rural, pre-industrial context, families guarded young women very zealously, and in some communities, you couldn't, if you were a young woman, you couldn't walk out your front door without being accompanied by a male relative, or at least several female relatives. And so, yeah, social dances, weddings, or feast days were one of the main times where young people could actually at least make eye contact with each other and maybe dance together. Certainly not hold hands, but maybe have one person in between them, some sympathetic person who would help, or maybe you could hold two ends of a handkerchief and dance next to each other. If the community knew that the families were thinking about getting you together, then you could be seen dancing next to each other in public. Of course, different places had different standards. So there aren't. I think because of the conservatism of these communities, and because most of the songs that even we sing today in the traditional context are quite old. Certainly, many of them are. I could at least say they reflect this pre-industrial way of life and mindset, which sometimes is quite surreal. Singing songs about, in the tradition that I mostly play from the island of Kalymnos, some of the most popular songs, one of the most popular ones is this kind of comic song about a shepherd and a king making a bet about who, it's unclear what the bet is about, but anyway, the shepherd bets 1,000 sheep and the king bets the the queen, and of course the shepherd wins and gets the queen. This kind of, and all of the imagery and vocabulary is totally surreal from the point of view of a 21st century person. All this technical vocabulary for different types of processes in the cheese making stages in the cheese making process, or different like things that the shepherd wears, you know, that we don't even see these days, but they stuck. The songs are so popular that we still sing them. You know, I had a great singing session just a couple weekends ago with a bunch of people in Orlando, Florida, in a hotel, you know, and this is the stuff we were singing. But anyway, we don't, because of the conservatism of this society, we don't really have songs about like narrations of people falling in love like that, but we do have a lot of these couplets that are about what people are feeling and how they're trying to hide those feelings or make them secret. So ways of expressing this yearning to be with somebody, but it's usually in coded language. You know, little things like, you know, Ella pobros mu perase, chave milisis yelaste. Come and walk by me, and if you can't talk, if you can't speak, in other words, if there's people watching, at least smile. You know, so I know that you're thinking of me, or you know, all kinds of things like that. You know, like so one from Kalimnos. Ella politisamu che Grigora na pas na mi sefun hitoni che puntos magapas. So like, come to me anyway, and leave quickly when we're done meeting, so that the neighbors don't see you and start talking about how we're in love. You know, this is the kind of stuff that we have, right? But we also, what we do have are a lot of narrations of tragic love stories where a young couple, like what you're saying, but it's not a happy ending because somebody finds out, and invariably the girl is the one who's punished, usually by getting stabbed to death by her brother or something for betraying the family's honor, this kind of thing. So we have a lot of those, but we don't have the happy stories where people fall in love, usually. Yeah.
So picking up on that kind of idea of sort of tragic things, one of the things we looked at in ancient Greek hero is laments. And I wondered if you could maybe talk a little bit about, is there a lament tradition in modern Greece? Is it female, male, both?
Yes, there is a very strong, very profound tradition of laments, funeral laments that are almost exclusively, perhaps exclusively, sung by women, and oftentimes by professional mourners. This is something that still exists in many places in rural Greece, and there's been some. Margaret Alexiou, who was a professor at Harvard for some time, wrote some very important work on that genre, as has Michael Hertzfeld, who's an anthropologist at Harvard. But there are also a lot of songs that anybody can sing that in their own way are laments for specific populations. Again, the tradition I know, the island of Kalimnos, the major industry there for hundreds of years has been, until quite recently, sponge diving, diving for sponges, and it's a very dangerous occupation, as you can imagine, especially when people were free diving, just holding their breath and diving down. But even with the invention of modern diving equipment, because there was so much pressure on people to produce, to make a lot of money and pay back investments, a lot of people had accidents. And of course, there's, you can never tell what's going to happen when you're 30 meters below the ocean's surface. Shark attacks, bad weather, equipment malfunctioning, this kind of thing. So there's a lot of songs about that, either lamenting somebody's loss, or in the case of Kalimnos, a big part of the repertoire is lamenting the absence of men, who most able-bodied men would be gone for 9 months out of the year. So there are a lot of songs like that. I could sing really briefly one of those if you like.
That'd be great, Paddy. Thank you.
Yeah. So there's one. The melody is called Barbathotori, Uncle Ted, Uncle Teddy, I guess, because there was some guy apparently named Theodoris who used to sing it a lot. But we usually call it, sometimes we refer to it as tis mechanis to forema, which is the way this couplet starts. So that means the suit, the machine suit, which was the deep diving suit that the men would wear. So it says, so this is from the perspective of a woman who's at home, who's been left at home. Tis mechanis to forema, θα το μαλαματώσω. Για να μπει η κυρά ψηλή, ίσως και σε γλιτώσω. So I'll cover your diving suit in gold. Probably what she means is she'll get a little golden icon of a diving suit and hang, and για να μπει η κυρά ψηλή, so that the κυρά ψηλή, the most high lady, is one of the names of the Virgin Mary in Kalimnos. She'll hang it on that icon, hopefully, and she says, hopefully this will save you. So these kinds of things. So that goes more or less like this. Hi. Tis mechanis to forema, θα το μαλαματώσω. Για να μπει το κόρμακι σου, ίσως και το γλιτώσω. Μες στα πέτρωτα, καλέ μες στα πέτρωτα. Μες στα πέτρωτα μια χρυσοπέρδικα φύτα. So things like that, right? It's a
That's beautiful.
We joke you can't really sing Kalimnian music before noon or without a bottle of ouzo next to you.
So can I just clarify? So the men would be singing about the women saying these things about them while they're gone?
Yeah, absolutely. Or women singing about
the
men. But yeah, but there's some things that are only sung by women, some things that are usually only sung by men, but this is something, even though that's clearly from a female perspective.
Yeah, fascinating. Okay. So I see Bill has a question. We also have a question from the Q&A. Bill, why don't you go first?
So I thought that was pretty lively for a lament, but okay, whatever. My question is, what is that you're using for a pick?
Oh, yeah. So traditionally, we would use the quill of an eagle, but eagle quills are somewhat hard to come by these days. So this is just it's like a cable tie that I have cut off, and I double it so that it's flexible.
Amazing.
Yeah, but actually, it's a good Bill. What's your name? That's a good point. That it's definitely that's dance music, but we do sing these type of songs. But also, there are other melodies that are not danced that are part of the Kalimnian tradition, where we tend to sing about. Traditionally, they're sung about the sponge diver's absence or their departure. There's one that says, "Ήρθε η ώρα του φευγιού και του ποκινημάτου. Φεύγωσιν απ' την Κάλυμνο οι βέργες του κλιμάτου." So the time of leaving, the time of getting ready and going has come, and the branches of the grapevine, of the grape arbor are leaving, sailing away from Kalymnos. This is the most prized, beautiful, and that, I mean, just a second of that, so you hear what that sounds like goes. Φεύγουσι που την Καλυμνόη βέργες του κλίματου. That kind of thing. So it's
beautiful, beautiful. So you were talking about how you're using something a little bit different to do the strumming. We have a question from the Q&A that actually has to do with maybe some recent changes to the tradition. Jackie Donlin, a very dear friend of our community, mentions Tarpon Springs. She says, "I love that town and was just there again last week. Given how the town and environs have changed over the years, have you seen a similar change to how the traditional songs are performed, either instrumentally or in tempo?"
in Tarpon Springs? Sure, in different ways actually. So I think the most obvious change is that some of the older people who really preserved and carried on these traditions and passed them on to people like me, or inspired people like me, have gotten old and passed away. And so there's less of the hardcore of the old generation of people from Kalymnos who grew up in that, like I said, that pre-industrial context where this was the only available entertainment. My main music teacher there is still there. He's in his 80s. He was a grew up as a shepherd and as a sponge diver. Plays the tsambouna, the goatskin bagpipe, which I can show to you very briefly before we're done.
That would be beautiful. We'd love to see that. Yeah.
Yeah. So he's still around, and there are a couple of other people, but a lot of the really great singers and instrumentalists have gone. But Tarpon Springs has become a center of particularly dancing, traditional Greek dancing, because there are several very talented dance researchers and instructors, including my godfather, who also has been very important in my musical life, a guy named John Loulias. So there's a very active, very strong dance group that teaches, there's probably, over 100 kids and young adults who travel all around the country performing and teaching. And I was just playing for them at a festival in Orlando, a competition, actually, where they won first place because they're amazing dancers.
Amazing. We'll check that out. We'll try and put a link to that on our blog
I
post.
can
That'd be great.
sure. In fact, I have a link of one of their performances I can send.
That'd be great. Yeah.
So so there's a lot more young people getting involved in particularly dancing, and now playing instrumental music. Not as much doing the traditional things sung with the language, like improvising, because language skills aren't as strong as they were a generation or two ago. But
yeah, I'd like to hear a little bit about that. I know you want to show us the instrument, so maybe you could grab that instrument and then come back and talk to us a little bit about what you mean when you're saying improvising and composition and performance. You mentioned really early on when we first started speaking. So tell us about what you have there.
Okay, sure. So this is the this is the tsambouna, which is the Greek island bagpipe. This is the version from Kalymnos. It's still found all over the Aegean and in other places, particularly the Gulf states in the Arab world, and on the Black Sea coast of Turkey. It's we had a tsambouna at the CHS last year, says Maria.
Yeah.
Who was playing tsambouna?
Well, one of the fellows, Christy Konstantakopoulou, brought tsambouna from Mykonos. And we played when we had our final gathering with Greg and others. Christy played the tsambouna for us.
Amazing.
Unfortunately, I don't know whether Zoe has recorded it. So she might have recorded it.
Wow.
Yeah. We'll try and find out.
There are not that many tsambouna players in the world, so we have to meet. So I find this instrument particularly dear to me because I grew up around a couple of really great players of it. A lot of my most formative musical experiences that inspired me to devote my life to this stuff happened with people on some beach in Kalymnos playing this and singing. But this instrument actually is very associated with that extemporaneous composition and performance of rhyming couplets that I was telling you about. So traditionally somebody would be playing this or the violin and the laouto. People would be dancing and singers would take turns creating a type of dialogue, improvising these couplets. Now it's not it's not free poetry. It's a very, very strict meter. It's like I said, this rhyming iambic decapentameter, and there's all kinds of stylistic and language conventions that you have to follow for it to work. But if you're really good at it, and if you've memorized thousands of these, and you know all the patterns and the acceptable ways you can manipulate the patterns, you can do really amazing things with it. Actually, I have an article that should be coming out in the fall in the Journal of Modern Greek Studies that's exactly about this tradition in Kalymnos.
Beautiful.
But I'll play. This instrument is quite loud. But I'll play just a second of it. You can hear what it sounds like. And another reason why I think it's so interesting is that this is probably I would put my money on saying that something very like this is what shepherds all over the ancient Greek world were playing, because it's made purely out of materials that somebody in that environment could make by themselves. So the chanter, this thing is made out of the root of an olive tree. There's two pipes, you can see more clearly here. Two pipes made out of cane, just from a riverbed. You just burn some holes in them. The entire thing is held together with beeswax. And then this is the body, this is the entire body, minus the legs and head have been chopped off, of a young goat. And that's it. There's no other ingredient, really. So I'll give you an idea. And actually, what's very interesting is this double pipe is the same. Relatively speaking, is the same system that a lot of the ancient Greek wind instruments were. The aulos or the diaulos, the two-reeded pipe. You can see these on, if you go to the Museum of Fine Arts in Boston, there's satyrs playing something just like this, but without the bag. So I'll inflate it and I'll play just a second so you can hear what it sounds like. Hear it.
Okay, hopefully Google Hangout will. I know it's not ideal for music, but I'm excited we can share with everybody. Look at that, the shape, you can see it, right?
Yeah, I'm going to take my headphones off.
Okay, that's fine. Doing great.
It's cold, and so one of the pipes isn't sounding. But give me a second to know.
Okay. Amazing. That's fun. Have fun.
You get the idea. This is the kind of instrument that if once you take it out, once you inflate it, you have to play it for 5 or 6 hours. So.
Oh wow! Oh, okay.
It takes a while. It takes a while to get started, and then
to get tuned up, right?
Yeah.
That's
but
so
just
beautiful.
so you have an idea, we'll have to arrange a tsambouna party.
Yes. Well, we can arrange a separate performance. So, Patty, we did hit 12:01. There's so much we could talk about. I wish we had more time, but I know you have other commitments, and our community members do too. I'm just so grateful that you joined us today. It was so beautiful, and I hope that we can continue having dialogues with the community and you over the months to come. Hopefully, you can come back and join us again.
I'd love to. Thanks for everything. Thanks to everybody for participating, for your questions. It was great to talk to you, and hopefully we'll see each other in person sometime.
Yes, thank you so much. Thanks to all the community members who's joined us, everyone who watched us live, and everyone who is watching recorded on YouTube. Thanks so much. Don't forget to join us at CHS in hour 25 for additional open house discussions with scholars, artists, researchers, performers. We're really working to connect you with people who are really engaging with this tradition in meaningful ways. So thank you so much for joining us.
All right, thank you. Bye-bye.